There's a moment in every exam where the program either holds or it doesn't. It isn't when the examiner asks for your AI policy, but about 90 seconds later. Once you've handed the policy over, they may flip through the first page, maybe nod once, but then they're going to ask a second question. And the second question is almost always a version of the same thing. Show me how you measure this. Welcome back to Into the Void. I'm Mark Vanis, founder of Void Vanguard. In the last episode, I framed the worldview that this podcast operates from. It's governance as a design discipline. It's the difference between a program that holds up under pressure and one that doesn't. I introduced the arc that I'll be walking you through over the next 4 episodes. Diagnose, expose, architect, prove. Today is diagnose, and diagnose is not what most people think it is. Diagnosis is not simply asking whether you have problems. Every governance program has problems. Diagnosis is asking whether you can measure the specific things that examiners are actually measuring. There are 3 of them, 3 primary gaps, and almost no one is measuring them well today. So let's get into it. I spent over 10 years building technology and security programs at a $3.5 billion financial institution transitioning into federal regulatory oversight through a bank charter acquisition. I defended those programs before KPMG, Deloitte, RSM, and CLA without material findings. I'm not telling you that as a credential, but rather I'm telling you that because what I'm about to describe is what examiners will care about in the room as it relates to AI, not what a framework says they should care about. Here's the pattern I've seen over and over and over. It's shown up in the IT general controls, identity and access management, model risk, and now within AI governance. And the pattern is simple. Organizations answer the wrong question when an examiner shows up. The examiner asks, show me the evidence. And the organization will show them a policy. The examiner asks, show me the population that this applies to. The organization responds with a framework. The examiner asks, show me the exceptions. The organization responds with a committee charter. The policy is not evidence, and framework is not population. A committee is not exception documentation. And that mismatch between what you can produce and what they want to see is where findings live. So when I talk about diagnose, I mean a very specific thing. I mean the ability to answer 3 questions with actual artifacts: population integrity, evidence linkage, exception documentation. 3 gaps, and I'll walk you through each one. Gap 1, population integrity. Population integrity is whether the list of things that you claim to be measuring is actually complete. When you tell an examiner, we review every high-risk AI model output, population integrity is whether your definition of high-risk AI model output catches every output that should be in scope, not 80% of them, not the ones you remembered, all of them. And here's why it matters. If a model isn't in your population, then no control you've designed can touch it. It's not being reviewed, it's not being monitored, and it's not being governed. And the gap is invisible until an examiner finds that one that you missed. This exact same pattern has plagued identity and access management for many years. Companies can run an access certification, certify 100% of privileged accounts, clean result. But then an examiner will ask, how do you define privilege? And it turns out the definition didn't catch the service accounts that had elevated permissions and shared credentials. And really, the certification wasn't wrong, but the population was. In AI governance, the equivalent question is, how are you defining an AI model? Does your inventory catch the model that's embedded in your SaaS product that's making decisions using your customers' data? Does it catch the statistical model that your credit team has been running in a spreadsheet? Does it catch the internal language model that somebody deployed for knowledge retrieval that's now quietly feeding customer communications? If your model inventory claims 47 models and an examiner asks how you know there aren't 48, then you need an answer. It can't be a guess. It needs to be an answer. The population integrity is the first gap, and most organizations don't even know they have it yet. Gap 2, evidence linkage. Evidence linkage is whether you can trace a specific control operating on a specific date against a specific population, producing a specific artifact. Not that you have evidence, not that you have logs, but that you can link the 3 of them, control, operation, artifact, into a single, traceable chain. Let me make this specific. Your policy says that high-risk AI model outputs require human review before they influence a material decision. Fine, that's great. But when the examiner asks, show me for this specific credit decision on this specific date that the review was conducted, you need three things that are linked together. You need model output, you need the reviewer's attestation, and you need a timestamp that proves the review happened before the decision was acted on. If you have all three, but they're in separate systems with no linking key between them, then you don't have evidence, you have fragments. This is the same problem that I've seen in identity and access management programs that were built around ID general controls only. Institutions have access provisioning logs, approval records, and manager certifications, but nothing that linked a specific user's access back to a specific ticket with a specific approver on a specific date. So when the examiner asked, show me how the person got access, the answer was a reconstruction, assembled after the fact from multiple sources. And a reconstruction is not evidence. Reconstruction is what you do when you don't have evidence as a result of the design. In AI governance, the linkage gap is the reason that most human oversight claims don't hold up. The policy says that humans review. A human did, in fact, review something, somewhere, on some date, but there's no link from that specific review to the specific model output to that specific decision. The review happened. The evidence of the review, linked to the thing that was reviewed, does not exist. Evidence linkage is the second gap, and it's the one that turns working programs into failed audits. Gap 3 is exception documentation. Exception documentation is whether deviations from expected control behavior are recorded, approved, rationalized, and compensated. It's not whether exceptions happen, because exceptions always happen, but whether they're documented in a way that distinguishes an approved deviation from a control failure. Here's the rule an examiner is going to operate from. An undocumented exception is indistinguishable from a control failure. If your AI model produced an output that bypassed normal thresholds and there's no record of who noticed it, who approved the deviation, and what compensating control was applied, the examiner is going to have to assume that the control failed. They have no basis to assume anything else. Every institution has segregation of duties conflicts, almost every single one. The question the examiner asks isn't, do you have conflicts? Because the answer is always yes. The question, rather, is where are they documented, who approved them, and what compensating controls apply? An institution that answers those three questions clearly walks out of the room, and one that tries to claim that they have no conflicts does not. In AI governance, the equivalent pattern is model performance exceptions. Every model drifts. Every model produces outputs that are outside of the expected range. The question is, are those moments captured, triaged, and documented? Not once a quarter in a committee meeting, contemporaneously, in a system, with an owner. Exception documentation is the third gap, and it's the gap that creates the most dangerous class of finding, because it doesn't just say that your control didn't work, it says that you didn't even know it didn't work. Three gaps: population integrity, evidence linkage, exception documentation. Each one lives somewhere inside of a structure, and that structure is what I call the governance spine. 5 layers: appetite, strategy, controls, evidence, reporting. Appetite is what your organization tolerates. Strategy is how you operate inside of that tolerance. Controls are the mechanisms that make the strategy real. Evidence is what the controls produce, and reporting is how the evidence becomes something that leadership and examiners can act on. Every gap that I just described lives at a very specific layer. Population integrity is an appetite and a strategy problem. You can't test a population that you haven't defined, and you can't define a population you haven't strategized for. Evidence linkage is a controls and evidence problem. Your controls must be designed to produce linked artifacts, not just to run. Exception documentation is an evidence and reporting problem. Exceptions have to be captured contemporaneously and surfaced to the right owner. I'll reference this spine across the rest of the series. For now, just hold the 5 words: appetite, strategy, controls, evidence, reporting. They're the map for everything that comes next. So here's the diagnostic exercise I'll leave you with. Pick one AI use case in your organization, just one. Something that's already deployed or a proof of concept, something that's already being evaluated, and run these three gaps against it. Gap 1, population integrity. Can you state the full population this control applies to and defend the definition? And if you can't, you have a strategy gap before you have a controls gap. Gap 2, evidence linkage. Pick a date in the last 30 days. Can you produce a specific artifact that proves that that control operated on the population on that date? Not reports, but the actual artifact. If you have to reconstruct it, then you have an evidence gap. Gap 3, exception documentation. Have there been any deviations in that control over the last quarter? And can you produce the record of who noticed it, who approved it, and what the compensating control was? And if there's been no deviations at all, I'd suggest that you're not looking hard enough. If you get through all three cleanly, your governance architecture is measuring what it should be measuring. And if you stall on any of them, then the diagnosis has helped identify a gap, and that gap is a great starting point. It's not a theoretical gap. It's a specific, named, addressable one. That's Diagnose. This is Into the Void. The next episode is Expose. We're going to talk about the difference between a mechanism failure and a task failure and why one of them gets you an exam finding and the other doesn't. I'll give you my 5-question framework that I use to tell them apart in real time. If you, a coworker, or a friend is trying to close these gaps, please share the podcast with them. Capability without catastrophe. That is the standard.